He's smiling already. That's why we love him. He's with us each and every week. One of our favorite conversations. Jon Morosi is with us. How are you, man?
I am outstanding, my friends. We have got the regular season is officially underway. I give massive credit to all those in the great city of Seattle who were up at 3 a.m. local time each of the last 2 days to watch the Dodgers and Cubs. And if you weren't, that's okay, as long as you're tuning in when the Mariners play the Athletics. And I do think, gentlemen, that we can say with confidence that even in Arizona, that Mariners manager Dan Wilson is a loyal listener of this great radio program, because we were talking about how Gilbert probably deserved the opening day nod, and I think in a matter of hours, days after we had the conversation, Dan Wilson agrees, yes, Logan Gilbert gets the opening day nod. So I think he's a loyal listener of the radio program.
As he should be, and you're probably right. But no,
he's probably got little else to do, right?
He's got nothing else going on.
That's why we always say baseball is the great radio sport. You can just have, it's a pastime for that reason. Just, he can relax out there in beautiful Peoria, watch the sunset there, and listen to this amazing radio show.
You know, in talking about that, and we had the comments from Logan Gilbert on the heels of that, and he's obviously very, flattered and overwhelmed and honored to have that distinction. But he talked about the reaction from Luis Castillo, which I thought was awesome. He said, I think he's happier for me than I am for me. Essentially, that he was just almost glowing, which I thought was just a testament to his character. For a guy who expressed how important it was to him to be the opening day starter, Luis Castillo, one of his 3 goals going into the season, and he doesn't get that honor. His teammate does, and he apparently was just over the moon about it and couldn't have been more gracious. It just, I don't know. I really loved hearing that from Logan, and it just spoke to Luis's character, I thought. And I don't know how much you've had a chance to interact with him. He doesn't speak English, so we haven't interviewed him outside of a group setting with an interpreter. But what's your knowledge of him, your interactions with him over the years?
Right. I don't know him especially well on a personal basis, but what you said a moment ago does not surprise me. He is regarded as a very popular teammate, easy to smile. I think that's a big part of who he is, and easygoing, but of course, as you're describing, also a competitor. And I've long believed in all my years of covering baseball that you can't fool the players. The players are smart, and they know what's going on. They know, probably even before it was official, that Gilbert was trending toward that direction of having the opening day start. And you do credit the players that truly react in a selfless way. And Gilbert would not have shared that publicly if the reaction was not as genuine as we now know it to be. This was not something that was phony, hey, congratulations, and then goes and sulks and is upset that he wasn't the guy. You could tell by the way that Logan described it that it was a really heartfelt and sincere, very sincere demonstration of Luis being very happy for his teammate. And that sets a really good tone. That kind of emotion, that kind of cohesion on the pitching staff, especially just given the uncertainty surrounding Kirby, and obviously today really encouraging to see Hancock throw as well as he did. But they're going to need that. You need that cohesiveness and support as a group. And a lot of the really good teams that I've been around in my career covering baseball have had elements of support from one starter to the next. And so that is just a really great way for the Mariners to start their year, and you've got to give credit to Castillo for being a true gentleman in that way. And yeah, he was competing for it as you described, but he was happy for his teammate in the end, and I think that just sets a really positive tone for the Mariners.
Well, and obviously it speaks to, like you said, the cohesion that group has. But how do the catchers fit in? You've got Garver, mostly Cal, right? But those guys cement that relationship, right?
They do, and I think it creates a position group to where you think about the NFL and different teams where you can really break down your position groups into certain rooms. Obviously, as the saying is now, the NFL very popular. But in pitching and in baseball, it is the battery, and it's interesting, actually. And we've talked a lot about Japanese baseball this week. In Japan, there is a coach who is known as the battery coach, meaning the coach of the pitchers and catchers working together. It sometimes there's obviously a very strong correlation between that person and the quote unquote pitching coach, but that is an element of baseball in Asia, that there is an understanding of who the battery is and what the obligations are of sort of the holistic part of that connection, which I love that notion, the battery coach. I've liked that a lot. and so it is important. I think we've talked before about how many games Raleigh is going to catch. The interesting thing now with respect to this roster and how it all balances out is Rowdy Tellez and his claim now to more at-bats. Because if Garver, depending on how many games Garver is going to catch, I think that's the unknown here, is he's both the backup catcher and potentially the primary DH. Then what does that mean for Mitch Haniger? What does that mean for Tellez? I am of the mind, and I saw Ryan Divish's report about Tellez having the opt-out this weekend, which fits with someone who has that level of service time in Major League Baseball and sign a minor league deal. I'll say it right here. I would be really surprised if he does not make the opening day roster. I just think that he's had a really good spring, and Tellez's support, the better that he plays, depending on how they want to mix and match with the at-bats, the better Tellez plays, especially if Haniger is not really ready to go from a physical standpoint, then really maybe more of Garver's at-bats will come as the true backup catcher, depending on how many days off Cal needs. It's probably not going to be many because Cal loves to play, but if Tellez steps in as the DH, and if there's something of a platoon between Tellez and Garver left-right, that perhaps we're going to see a lot more games of Rowdy Tellez in that role than any of us would have thought when spring training began.
Well, you just touched on what's been one of my biggest questions, and that is, how does Mitch Haniger fit? What's his role on this team? Because he's not their right fielder. That's Victor Robles, and maybe he could spell him out there, but Luke Raley's a guy who could spell the outfield. I don't know who they feel better about out there. But so if he's relegated to being a DH, is he just a part-time DH, and they'll just look at the analytics and the history versus certain pitchers, and okay, we're going to throw Mitch in this against this guy, and it'll be Garver against this guy, maybe Tellez against this guy. It feels like they don't have their set DH, and he's sort of the wild card in that he makes a lot of money in Seattle Mariner money, yet he doesn't have an obvious role.
They're in a tough spot with him because I do know certainly there's a lot of affinity for him in the organization. Now his second tenure with the team, he's been a popular guy in that clubhouse for a long time. Even he departs and he comes back. But I like you look at this lineup and say, where does he fit? And at some point there is a little bit of redundancy with how many of the sort of the corner bats / DHs that you're carrying, especially when you consider, and again, especially when you consider that in an ideal world that Raleigh catches a ton. So Garver's going to have to get some at-bats as a DH just to keep him sharp. And then if Tellez is on your team, you're not going to just bench him. And you've got Raley. It's just, there's not a lot of space for him. And honestly, he has not played enough or shown enough this spring to have trade value at the moment. So it is a little bit of a delicate circumstance. On some level, it's up to the Mariners, I think, to look at it as you have to regard that as a sunk cost, if you will, if you end up having to move on or maybe trade his contract as you get towards opening day. But I would suspect that Haniger is one of the toughest decisions the Mariners are facing right now. Does he have a roster spot? Is there an injury situation that would preclude him from being on the roster? I agree with you. I don't see where he fits, and it's interesting. And again, this is the classic case of spring training. Some of the guys that have come in trying to win a job have that don't necessarily have a clear spot on the roster, like Mastrobuoni, for example. He's had a really good spring. Now he's not one of their 3 starting outfielders, but he is also someone that, just based on his versatility, he has an option left, so they can send him down to the minor leagues. But if the question is who's had a better spring between him and Haniger, it's Mastrobuoni's had a better spring. He's played more. He's got a little bit more of a diverse skill set. Whereas I do think Haniger, especially if you're going to look at Garver as your DH, you got 2 righty DHs who neither of whom are giving you a ton of defensive value outside of Garver being a catcher. It's a very difficult fit on the roster right now, and Moore's got to make the team because he's really versatile. Solano's got to make the team. You just signed him. Polanco's played really well, fortunately. Had a home run today. Guys are passing Haniger by in terms of having good claims to at-bats with this team right now.
JP, it's pretty evident that for Mariner fans, they want to get off to a fast start. But for this team, how important is that this year? I mean, everybody wants to get off to a fast start, but particularly if the pitching is doing really well and the offense isn't keeping up, I think it's going to be more crucial than in years past. At least that's kind of the vibe we get from the texters anyway.
Well, sure, there is pressure. I would say there are other divisions that have a greater urgency to start fast. I think probably in the American League East, when you consider just how good that division is top to bottom. In the National League East, where you've got 3 potential World Series teams, I would say Braves, Mets, Phillies. But the AL West this year, especially when you now look at, my goodness, the Rangers are having another pitching injury every day, it seems. So they've had a really difficult last week or so. They signed Patrick Corbin, but there's now Bradford's got an issue. Gray's out for a while. They've got some concerns, I think, in with Texas right now. And Houston is still trying to find their way. What's exactly Altuve's role going to be? And is Smith going to be on the opening day roster, the young catcher or the young outfielder that they got? And he can also play the infield too. But they got him in the Kyle Tucker trade. So there's a lot of moving parts in this division right now, to where I actually think it's going to be a very closely contested division for a long time this year. I don't think anybody's going to run away and win 100 games in this division. You might see a division champion in this division this year that wins 92 or 93. I don't think that there's a can't miss team in this division. For a while, you would have said it was Houston. Then, of course, Texas goes out and wins the World Series 2 years ago. I think it's going to be a very closely contested division with a lot of teams that are good but also flawed. And I think for Seattle, yeah, I'd love to say, hey, have an amazing April, be 5 games above 500 by the time April's over. They just have to par the hole here for April. Just start out with a good par, and if you're 5 games over 500, great. But just don't let yourself be way behind the 8 ball. And they've got to start better than they did last year. They know that. Julio's got to be better early. He knows that. We all know the situation here. But I don't think that there's quite. I would use the word, there's not desperation. There shouldn't be. Just have a solid start. And if you have a solid enough start, I look at the Mariners given some of their pitching assets, some of what we've seen from their young players in spring training. I think they'll actually be a pretty solid team as the year goes along, as long as they can find a solid, safe month of April to use as a foundation.
Yeah, I put more of the importance on pacifying the fan base, because the fan base is just in a different spot than they've been in years past of agitation and lack of slack. I don't think there's going to be a lot of slack given, especially, John, if they start losing games where the pitcher goes out there and just delivers a gem, right? 6, 7 plus, 2 runs or less. I mean, we saw it so many times, and the offense doesn't back them up. I just don't think the tolerance is there for it again. And it doesn't mean they won't come back. If the team finds it and starts rolling, they're going to be back. But I could see a quick exodus from a large swath of the fan base who have just, if we're just going to judge by what the texts and the social media that we see, that there's just a different level of intolerance, I guess, this year. So a fast start, I think, is big in that sense. Maybe not for the team, but for the fan base.
Right. I get it. And the irony, of course, is that this team probably, I guess I'll say this, I just think about other teams that I've talked about and looked at in spring. This is the team for whom, while I fully respect and acknowledge everything that you're saying about the way the fans feel about it, if they get off to a poor start, it's not as though they're going to fire the manager. Right? They did that in September. I don't think that the front office is in an especially perilous position either. They've already brought back Edgar. They've brought back Dan Wilson. They brought in a new hitting coach in Kevin Seitzer. I think their pitching coach, obviously, Woodworth has done a great job the last several years. So if they get off to a poor start, this is not one of those teams that I'd be checking my phone every 5 minutes to see what moves they've made in a dramatic way. They are set up to, however flawed or good the roster ends up being, this is not one of those Jerry Dipoto is going to start making a trade every day that ends in Y. There's just they made some moves. They were quiet moves. They were subtle moves, but they've already made their moves. This is not a roster that lends itself to continual replenishing and charging, especially because that is expensive, and that's not really what they're into right now. So this is their team. I would recommend to Mariner fans, yes, it's twofold. Number one, sure, urge them to get off to a great start. Maybe be a little patient if it doesn't go the way that you expect. But I think my next best advice is just don't spend a ton of time on wondering who's going to get fired with this team, because I don't see that as being a logical course of action, even if they happen to be 3 or 4 games under 500 by the time April's over.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. We talked to Greg Amsinger, just a great guy, yesterday.
He is great. Well, one of my teammates.
Yeah. And how tall is he, by the way? I said he was 7 feet.
Taller than me. I can say taller than actually, here's a story. I'll give a little quick parenthetical. Greg's daughter, for at least a season or two, was a college basketball teammate of Drew Bledsoe's daughter, Colorado College. How about that? I'm bringing the Northwest all together. There you go. That is a true fact. You can ask Greg about it next time.
So Amsinger, what he said to us is, we talked about Dan Wilson, and he's like, he's a Mariner. And it really, just the way he put it, and he's right, through and through. And for people here in Seattle, and then, because Scott was a great guy. Everybody loves Scott Service. But, it's just different with Dan Wilson. And, I know you've gotten a chance to get to know him, but that really kind of hit home with me, like, okay, yeah, he's right. And I think for that reason, he's going to get a lot of leeway from the fan base, but also the guys in the dugout on game day, I feel like, as well.
Right. I think you're spot on about it. And two, this, as much as, yes, he had September, that was such a rushed situation for him to step in there, and there was such a negative vibe when he arrived, and of course the team played well for him. That's important to point out. And then spring training happens, but now starting next week, and it's great. It'll be a week from tomorrow when it all gets started. That we'll get a chance to see him settle in and do the job in the regular season and really enjoy the journey of it. And it is a grind. I mean, as any manager says, you take the photo on day one, spring training day, you're suntan, you're feeling good, and then you compare that to how he looks in like July after like a 3-city road trip. Yeah. The job ages you. It does. And I think that he'll feel it, but he knows he's lived through major league seasons for his whole adult life, basically. So he knows what that's all about. But I do think that he'll have a little bit more of that goodwill with the fan base, as you point out, Dave. And there are those players. It's interesting. There are those players I think in baseball almost more than any other sport, just because they're in your home every day when you're watching them over a long time. That there are those players who mean way more to the local fans than the other superstars around the league. That if you polled Mariner fans today and said, okay, you could either have dinner tonight with Dan Wilson or Mike Trout, they would say Dan Wilson, because he feels like he's your neighbor. Right. And I think there are certain people in baseball that have that resonance. I think about Frank White for a long time in Kansas City, like really good players, all-star players in their best years, who are not Hall of Famers in the Baseball Hall of Fame, but who are icons. Right. And different teams have them. And, again, I mentioned Frank White in Kansas City. You think in Minnesota, Kent Herbeck as an example. It's really good players who are just institutions where they played. And I think Dan Wilson is that in Seattle.
Jon, you're the best. We appreciate you. Look forward to this conversation each and every week. Have a great rest of your week, and we'll talk on the heels of the season starting for the Mariners.
I can't wait. Enjoy the tournament. May everyone's brackets be correct, or at least not totally ruined by about 4:00 tomorrow. I wish you all have brackets that survive in some form until at least Saturday. And so enjoy the tournament, and we'll catch up on opening day eve 1 week from tonight. Can't wait for it.
We appreciate you. Thanks, man.
All the best. Thank you so much. Thanks.
There you go. Jon Morosi, everybody. If you missed any part of